The promoting model is wrong. As promoters, we should be working with the artist's team to develop the artist's career. And that shouldn't just be about the money.
You're listening to Echoes of Prague Music Week.
Hello and welcome to today's podcast. My name is Krystian Kratochvilova and I'm pleased to introduce our guest, Nick Hobbs, the founder of Charmworks and Charm Music. Welcome.
Thank you.
I would like to ask, do you still recall the first concert you ever worked on?
The first one I ever worked on? Kind of, yes. The first concert I promoted was with a band called Henry Cow, and it was in Italy. Well, it was the first tour that I ever arranged, actually. And I was about 22, something like that. And I was a friend of theirs, and I'd moved to Italy. And I just suggested to them that I organize a tour for them, and they said yes. And I did. And one of the concerts I promoted, and the tour was well organized. And the concert I promoted lost money, but afterwards they said, "Would you like to come back to Britain with us and be our manager?" And I said yes. And that was, that really.
So you didn't plan to become a manager?
No, I planned nothing. No, I had no plan. I mean, I was so young that life was kind of just it was constantly changing. I was working for a friend's uncle who was a rich man or a successful man running had a factory, and he'd invited me to work for him. And he just said to me, "Do you want to be the manager of a new factory we're opening in Brazil?" And I said no, because I want to go off and be the manager of this band in London, which was very stupid, but very romantic.
So your life could have been totally different.
Totally different, yeah.
What kind of factory was that? Do you still recall?
Say again?
What kind of factory was that in Brazil?
They made electric pumps and electric stuff, machines and whatever. I mean, it was a real work, where you really made real things and had real workers and engineers and all that kind of thing. I knew nothing about that side of things, but I was good administrator or good at selling, I guess.
And do you remember what initially sparked the interest in working in music industry, or was it just?
I was into music from very young. I mean, I didn't know until I didn't become a musician until much later, and I didn't know until I was 16 that music was going to be the center of my life. But at 16, I knew. Before then, I was just into music like everyone else. And then at 16, it sort of changed the direction of my life fundamentally. And so then I think it was pretty clear after that I would end up somehow. It wasn't clear to me, but I think looking back at it, it was pretty clear that I would end up doing something with music.
Mm-hmm. And did you look for some full-time job at some concert venue or something? Or
No, I never thought like that. I just did things myself. I never applied for a job. Of course, there were times when I got jobs, but I just did things and assumed that everybody would want to work with me. I had a bit like this band, my friends who just asked me to be their manager. I didn't do anything. I just, of course, I organized their tour, but it wasn't meant to be a job.
Mm-hmm. And how big was the tour?
It's I can't remember, but it was maybe 7 concerts or something in Italy.
So quite a lot.
Quite a lot. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't speak Italian. I just assumed that I could do it. I had that kind of goal, we say, where you're so young that you think you can do anything. Mm-hmm. Reality, of course, is different.
And how was it back then? How did you book those concerts? Like
when with the telephone?
Yeah, because when you said that you didn't speak Italian, that
you just phone people. It was weird. I don't know how I did it actually, but I would find out. I really don't know how I did. I don't remember how I did it, but by persistence, by phoning people, by having some contacts or discovering contacts by going to meet people. I remember going to Milan and meeting a cooperative, a musicians cooperative, and essentially by networking and by being persistent. Those two things.
And for how long did you work with this band?
Only a year, because they split up. So I moved to London, and a year later they split up. Wasn't my fault, but I stayed friends with them. I'm still friends with them, and there were other projects that came out of their dissolution, which I continued working with for a while, and then I shifted. I shifted into doing other things in music.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember the first big step in the music industry, the one when you maybe thought?
It's hard to say what the first big step was, because they all seemed pretty big at the time. After moving to London, then the next step was I moved to Stockholm, and I got a job with a concert promoting organization, another kind of cooperative almost. Almost immediately, they gave me a job. I don't know why. And I joined. I'd moved to Stockholm to join a band, and then they split up after a year, which wasn't my fault. And I moved back to London. Then I got a job at Rough Trade, which lasted for a while in one form or another. And out of that grew my career, whatever it was. I didn't think of it as a career, but whatever, it kind of just unfolded naturally.
Mm-hmm. And how come you decided to start your own agency? When was that?
Well, I started managing an artist who was actually on Rough Trade, I think, and then I managed, and management became important. But I also had other work, mostly in live music, partly in Italy, because by then I spoke Italian and I was well connected in Italy. But also in other countries. I also started I was working in Eastern Europe already at that point. And I just did things. I did a lot of different things. And managing the band was American, so I got to America, and then I managed another band, and we went to Japan, and I don't know. We did lots of different things. And I never planned it, and I just sort of hoped that I would make a living out of it all, which I kind of did with difficulty.
And you came up with that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And, so if you've got quite a lot of experience, so if you technologies aside, if you compare the times when you started in the music industry and nowadays, what do you see the biggest differences in?
I think. I became. I started to operate at a more professional level, but of course, I was even in the 80s, when I was still pretty young, I was doing some big things or involved with some big projects, big bands. The business as a whole, when you start employing people and you start opening an office and you have people you're responsible for, you have to pay the salaries for, then of course you become more business orientated. You're starting to think out of necessity. You're thinking about your income and your expenses. I made lots and lots of mistakes in the course of running the business, and also in the course of concert promoting. But I survived, and I hope I survived because I'm not completely stupid, and because I work in a more or less what would be the word, responsible way. Correct way. I care about what I'm doing. I don't see it as a short solution to making money quickly. I'm not terribly. I would say I'm a pragmatic, realistic kind of a person, which is useful if you're actually organizing concerts, because they're real things. They're not just dreams. I developed a philosophy of running a business, which was, again, kind of my natural philosophy, and which I'd already had much younger, but wasn't so articulated. And then it became articulated in how do you work with other people? How do you work with your employees? How do you develop teams? How do you develop creativity? How do you unleash the potential or open the potential that people have? And lots of questions like that, which I try to engage with and find solutions, or not solutions, but ways of engaging with them. And that continues to this day. Nothing's changed. The level has changed in as much as we do bigger concerts and we have bigger responsibilities and there's a bigger team. And the overall context of the business has changed because now there's Live Nation and now there's this and there's that. You have to adapt to those changes in context. The same as you have to adapt to disasters that happen like COVID or the Russian invasion of Ukraine, or, you just have to go, this is out of my control. I have to somehow adapt my work to this new reality.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody wanted to walk in your steps, what would be your warning? What mistakes should people be aware of?
I do some mentoring from time to time, and of course it depends on the person. But I feel that I have the knowledge that I could very easily run an extraordinary university course, and we have a lot of resources internally as a company which address this question. You could say, I think I say to my teams a lot of different things, and I encourage people to take responsibility, to never say no to responsibility, to not be afraid of taking more responsibility, to believe in yourself to the extent that you think you can do as well as anyone else, that you're not worse than anyone else, to be open about your mistakes, your shortcomings, your limitations, whatever, just to be open about it, not to lose any sleep about it, but simply to recognize them. And I think a very important principle is the one where you're continually curious, you're continually learning, that you have an open mind, that you want to understand things better, that you don't do things like a robot. You do things, and at the same time you try to understand what you're doing and why we're doing things that way. I really appreciate, or I really try to encourage people to express their points of view about music, about the work, about the way we organize the work, to be critical, to have opinions, to have differences, to be ready to argue, and that includes arguing with me, not to be afraid of the boss, to think non-hierarchically. That's terribly important for me. A company where the youngest person in the company, their opinion can be just as important or is just as important as the oldest person in the company. All of that kind of thing. So that's a kind of what I would call a progressive ethos of how to run a company. And then you have to make it work. It's fine having the theory, but the practice is always tougher because you're dealing with real human beings who come with all kinds of issues. And some of those issues are zeitgeist issues, generational issues or whatever. And you try to transcend those. Of course, you try to be progressive as a company in gender terms, in diversity terms, in sexuality terms, in ethnicity terms, in every possible progressive way. You try to encourage you hope the company can be itself progressive. So in other words, that your company is a microcosm of the society in which you exist. And so the changes have to happen at a microcosmic level as well as a larger social level. So all of that kind of stuff is really interesting, I think, from an employer point of view or company owner point of view. How do you deal with that? How do you work with that? And at the same time, you have to make money because you're a business and you're in a capitalist economy. So these are ongoing, never-ending questions, but they don't have clear answers, and they're part of what one works with.
Mm-hmm. And as a company owner, you have offices in many countries.
A few,
sorry. But is it important for you to know all of the people that work for you?
Well, we don't employ that many people. We've never got. I think the maximum we've employed is about 32. So of course I know everyone. Some people I don't. Some people I don't know as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, of course I know everyone, and I try to know everyone. I try to encourage everyone to feel that there's no barrier between them and me. We have meetings, we have Zooms, we have email exchanges, we have all kinds of different mechanisms within the company to try to ensure that people feel valued, respected, invited, encouraged, supported, etc.
Mm-hmm. And you've been involved in music, theater making, writing, and green activism. And how do these experiences influence your work in talent management and promotion?
Of course, I'm just one person, so I'm not schizophrenic, so I can't separate myself into different compartments. So they all influence each other, and being a musician and working as a music organizer are related. I think other things that I do, a lot of cultural work of different kinds, but being a green activist is maybe, on the one hand, it's different, but on the other hand, everybody should be a green activist as far as I'm concerned if we want a future for our planet and our species. So I find it like, and one can bring it into one's work. It's always an open question, but of course in the concert business there's a lot of discussion about making it greener, making it more sustainable, and fundamentally it's not a very sustainable business. There's artists that are touring around the world with huge productions and entourages, and when you organize a concert, people have to get there, they have to go home, so it's not very sustainable. So how do you make it more sustainable is a very serious question.
How are you making these events more sustainable?
I think we struggle in Eastern Europe. I feel a lot of, it's so hard to survive financially that there's not a lot of space to do very much beyond very banal level. Like here at Prague Music Week, okay, there's some recycling going on, which is probably not very, kind of not too serious, and I feel we're like the same. I have my ideas about how the business could be more sustainable, and of course, certain big artists are grappling with this. Coldplay is a very famous example, but there are other artists. Massive Attack is one that has really put a lot of effort into trying to become more sustainable in their touring. You sort of feel that it's all inadequate, which it is, but then our whole social response to the climate emergency is inadequate, obviously. But our responses to everything are inadequate. Our response to the war in Ukraine is inadequate. Our response to war in Sudan is inadequate, and so forth and so on. So we are all in a situation where I think if we are sensitive, we feel inadequate. And I don't have an easy answer.
And why do you think not more bands are sustainable? Of course, Coldplay are a great example of how to make the greener concerts. But
relatively. I mean, it's not. It doesn't mean their model is sustainable. It just means it's less bad.
Yeah, but are there not more bands that are less bad? Do you think it's just
the money? Well, I think there's a tendency. Quite a strong. Radiohead is another band who I think really care about sustainability. I think there are quite a few, and I think everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people in the business, whether they're musicians or cultural workers, care. And there's a lot of discussion about it, and there are a lot of ideas, and there are festivals like Lowlands in the Netherlands. They have their own solar power plant. So they generate all the power for the festival from their own solar energy. So that's pretty radical to make that kind of investment. They have the resources to do that, and I don't. But of course, if each company, each person has to look at it themselves. I don't think my work is sustainable. I fly around the world. I fly to Prague Music Week. I can't really. There's not a choice. I'm in Istanbul. There's no train service. I either come or I don't come. I try in other ways to address through my quote unquote green activism address environmental issues, sustainability issues, biodiversity issues, but it's a little bit in a separate compartment to my professional work. I'm not happy about that.
Mm-hmm. And do you think there should be any regulations or laws that, for example, forbid the single-use plastics from concerts or something like that?
Short answer is yes. I think one of the things which is very important, which is a logic behind all kinds of regulations and laws, is to create a level playing field where everybody has to work with the same limitations. So if you, for example, you just say we will not use non-recyclable materials or whatever it is, then sure, or if society says we'll stop using coal as a source of energy and we'll only use solar power or wind power or sustainable other forms of power, then we adapt to that. Everybody has to adapt to that. And I think that's great. We have to do that. There's no choice. So I think it's tricky. How do you do that with a model of touring where artists are moving from city to city? And they kind of have to, because otherwise they can't do concerts, because people are local. So the artist comes to the people, not the people going to the artist. And there are definitely ways that could be more sustainable. One way, of course, is for the artist to carry less production rather than carrying, if you're Ed Sheeran and you're playing Czechia this year, you carry a whole load of stuff. You probably have 30 or 40 trucks, maybe even 50 trucks of special stage set and a special stage and special sound and special lights and special video. Well, you just go, well, okay, why do we really need that? The artist is already special. So why not just have a kind of modular system of sound, lights and video, which is the same everywhere, pretty much. And then the artist adapts to that, which is what happens more when an artist plays a festival, because the festival has its own stage, its own sound and lights and video, and the artist has to adapt to that. It's a long discussion, but that would seem to me already a big shift towards a sustainable model. Instead of having 50 trucks roaming around Europe, you would have 2 trucks, for example.
Mm-hmm. And how do you perceive, because there's always talks about how COVID changed the music scene. How do you perceive this change in your work?
Well, COVID was a disaster for us financially because we had 2 years without work almost. And we had very little support from the states of the countries we worked in. We had a little bit, including Czechia. So it was a disaster, but it was a disaster for most other promoters as well. If you were in some countries like France and Germany and the UK, it was less of a disaster because the government support was stronger. In Eastern Europe, generally, government support was weaker. We survived. Some companies didn't survive. Some venues didn't survive. Mostly people kind of survived because that's what you do. There's no choice. You have to survive. And you come out of it and you're bruised, you've lost money, and you somehow have to rebuild your business. And a lot of people did that.
Mm-hmm. And here in Czech, people stopped planning going to concerts ahead. Most of the tickets are sold 3 days before the event. Is it something that's happening in other countries as well?
I think that's an exaggeration. I mean, I know about Czech ticket sales. Czechs still buy tickets in advance. And I think it's similar in many other countries. There's a pattern, the fans buy the ticket when it goes on sale. Then there's a plateau, much lower level of sales, and then it accelerates towards the actual date of the concert. That pattern is common to most countries, most cities. I don't think it's directly to do with COVID. There are some COVID effects which are not so clear, not so black and white. For example, there's a certain generation which maybe didn't go to festivals during the COVID year, and so they didn't develop the habit. But it was only 2 years, it wasn't 10 years. So I think it didn't have such a big effect. I think it's actually more demographic shifts which are having a longer term effect, because there's fewer young people than there used to be in proportion to the overall population. And people drink less, so that they spend less money. You know, the clubs make less money, blah, blah, blah. These shifts, which are kind of subtle because it's a few percent a year, but actually have a long-term effect on the nature of the business, the live business. And then there are shifts because of digital technology, because of the way social media is consumed, the fact that everybody has a telephone, a smartphone, and everybody consumes, you know, playlists and streaming and all of these kind of things. They all have effects on the live business, which are not so clear. They're not. It's not A because of A. There's B. It's more like they influence things. They have subtle effects, which are very hard to read, very hard to understand exactly what the effect is. And as a promoter or as an organizer of concerts, you're continually trying to understand what's going on in the market, obviously, and it's very difficult to understand. There are shifts in genre, shifts in taste. There always were. It's always been like that. There are cycles. Some things come back into fashion. Some things go out of fashion. There are new artists. There are old artists. There are legacy artists, and et cetera, et cetera. And you have Live Nation, which, you know, you have a lot of different things and you have to adapt to it. And if you're smart, intelligent, dynamic, you have a better chance maybe of adapting, but it's not guaranteed.
Mm-hmm. And with all of the years of your experience, can you somehow predict the trends? Which genre is going to come back? Or
no, of course not. No, and I'm not going to even attempt it, because I don't listen to the same music that an 18-year-old or a 14-year-old listens to, and I can't. I listen to a lot of stuff. And I try to, you know, when there's a cultural phenomenon like, I don't know, Charlie XCX or Chapel Roan, I try to, try to familiarize myself with it, or Taylor Swift, in an extreme example. You know, so I try to understand it, both professionally, but also as a music lover. You know, what's going on here? Where does this fit into the scheme of things? And there are other artists which are maybe even more kind of millennial, like Fred Again, let's say, you know, where you feel this is really of the time. It's not particularly an artist that could have existed 20 years ago. Or not obviously, or The Weeknd, or, you know, and those are, they're in closer connection with the technology that enables that music to be distributed and listened to and marketed. I don't know. I think I have a company, so I employ people who I hope are more connected to those different spheres. Worlds of interest than I am. And my mind is full. I have enough on my plate. I listen to a lot of music all the time, but of course, part of it is for pleasure. I listen to music I want to listen to, or I discover things that that interest me, and they're not necessarily at all what interests young people.
And what music interests you?
I'm an avant-gardist. I like music which is extreme, which is provocative, which is different, which is, from another planet. I listen to an awful lot of world music, traditional music, folk music, a lot of avant-garde music, and I'm partly a music journalist, so and I'm a musician, so I'm listening to things with those different ears. Sometimes I listen to things kind of from an ethnomusicological point of view. For example, Kurdish folk music I've become a bit of an expert about, because I'm very interested in it ethnomusicologically. And that leads sometimes to things happening, like, I don't know, I'm involved with bringing a Kurdish folk artist to London in December, because I've become a bit of an expert on it. It's nothing to do with my business. And I write reviews I was at Womex last week, which is the World Music Conference, and I saw a lot of artists play, and I write reviews of them, and people share those reviews and they find them stimulating, and so that's kind of nice.
Mm-hmm. And how would you compare the experience of writing about music and about artists with actually working with artists?
Oh, it's different things. You know, if you write, you're honest, then of course you're expressing why you like something and why you don't like something, and it's just as much fun as a writer to write a negative review as it is a positive one. But the objective as a writer is your creativity as a writer is how do you express yourself creatively? How do you express yourselves in ways which are not cliches? Anybody can write cliches, but that's totally boring. So, can you write in a way that is imaginative, that is original, that is your own style, your own language, and that also communicates to a reader what it is you're enthusiastic about or what it is you're negative about, you don't like, and that might include some level of analysis, either socially or ethnomusicologically or whatever. And when I'm organizing concerts, it's my job, it's my profession. So there, I'm concerned about the safety of the audience, the quality of the experience of the audience, the quality of the experience of the artist. I'm also concerned about the economy of the show. That it's making money, hopefully, or not losing money at least. A lot of organizational issues, because there's a zillion things that can go wrong, and you have to try to somehow arrange things, set things up so that they don't go wrong, and if they do go wrong, that there's time to correct them.
Mm-hmm. And do you actually actively read other people's reviews, or you always want to make your own opinion?
No. Of course, I read record reviews in particular. If it's a journal or a medium which I value, because partly a review serves as a gatekeeper. Somebody's saying this is really good, and if I think either the medium or the writer has good taste, then of course I'm very interested. I'm curious to know, they think this is really good, so I'll check it out. I'll go and listen to Spotify at least for one song and one piece or whatever. And if I like it, I'll download it and listen to it further. And I discover a lot of music that way. Of course, time is. We all have restricted time, and we all choose the filters that work for us personally. For some people, it might be playlists, and for other people like me, I'm more old school media, I will. But I've discovered a lot of things by totally weird, idiosyncratic processes of following one thing, which leads to another, which leads to another.
Mm-hmm. And what artist did you discover lately?
Lately, Christ. What have I been listening to lately? It changes almost week by week. I'm continually listening to new music. This last 2 days, I've been listening to a lot of Turkish music because I'm working on a dance theater play as a director and writer, where I'm choosing the music. And I set some parameters up. I said they have to be songs sung by women and they have to be in Turkish. Okay, well that's, but then of course I already have a knowledge. I know a lot of music which fits those particular criteria, but then I want to expand that. So then I'm looking at who are the ones I don't know about, because I want to choose the most appropriate songs for this particular project. And it's just fun, it's interesting, it's engaging to do that. And whereas 3 weeks ago I was listening to a lot of very hardcore Kurdish folk music, because I had this effective commission from a London Festival of Contemporary Music, to bring a Kurdish folk singer to the festival, and I had to choose who would be the best for them. And I had a huge knowledge already, but I wanted to widen the knowledge, so I went deeper into it, or refresh my knowledge, re-listen to things that I hadn't listened to for a few years. So it's kind of like that with me. It's a very mysterious process. This morning I listened to. There was one of the Turkish women singers that I listened to. I noticed that her records were made together with a French double bass player, And I thought, well, his work is so good on these records. So what is his work like? So then I searched on his work, which is, of course, he's a neoclassicist, jazz, whatever. And, so then that leads to something else. And I like that kind of serendipity where you just discover things. And I went to this WOMEX, this World Music Festival last week, and there I saw 4 artists that I thought were really good. So, of course, I download their music and listen to it in more depth afterwards. It's not just I saw the concert and I felt the concert was really good. I also want to hear what their recordings are like. Are their recordings as good as their live performance? Or sometimes they're not. Sometimes they might even be better. And that might lead to something else because maybe they're in a genre which I don't know too much about, but I get really excited about. That's sort of it, really.
And as you're listening to so much music and working in music for such a long time, did you ever get tired of music? Did you ever have burnout or something?
It's the center of my life. No, I never get tired of it. Of course, when you see the 100th or 1000th British pub rock band, that doesn't kind of turn me on usually. But every now and then you see a British post-pop pub rock band that's outstanding, like Arctic Monkeys, which we promoted in 22, including Prague. And I didn't expect the concerts to be as good as they were, but they were. And you go, well, this is a really good band, and then you understand why they're so successful because actually they're really good. It's not, and then you go a bit deeper and you realize that it's the lyrics are speaking to people. The singer whose name I've forgotten, it's terrible, but he writes great lyrics. He also is a good singer and they're a good band, but it's the lyrics that people identify with, which is totally old school, which is fantastic. That doesn't change. I respect that, and the fact that you want a band that comes through like Fontaine's DC, where they've got a political point of view, where they're trying to really say something. I think that's exciting, and then if they can also convey that in the strength of their music, then that really goes somewhere. But I kind of like it's so. One day I'm listening to Taylor Swift because I want to understand why Taylor Swift is so successful. And the next day I'm listening to some Kurdish folk singer who's got an audience of 20 people. And it's, whose records never sold a single, hardly a single copy. And only is known to really very serious musicologists who are interested in Kurdish music. Okay. I like that kind of eclectic width.
Mm-hmm. And what qualities do you look for when you're discovering unique artists?
I have an open mind, and I feel I have my own aesthetic, which has developed over many years, but it started when I was quite young. Certainly by the time I was 16, I had a very clear aesthetic of what excited me. And that hasn't really changed. What's changed is that I listen to a much wider range of music than I did when I was 16. But even when I was 16, I listened to a pretty wide range of music. But I didn't know anything about Kurdish folk music at that point, I didn't know much about Indian classical music, which I also know a lot about now, for example. And you get interested in things like, for example, Palestine is really in the news for obvious reasons. So I've listened to a lot of Palestinian music over the last few years and a lot of Ukrainian music. I wanted to, partly professionally, I wanted to work with Ukrainian artists, partly because my own last album is about Ukraine, and I wanted to be a bit deeper in Ukrainian culture, but that was mostly through poetry. So I started reading a lot of Ukrainian poetry. I find all of that exciting. That you can, what's different about the world now, which makes things easier, is that so much of it is online. So if you just Google Ukrainian poetry, in 5 seconds you have a list of 20 Ukrainian poets or 50 Ukrainian poets. Or if you Google Ukrainian jazz, you'll find a list of Ukrainian jazz artists, and then you can go and do your research online and discover which ones you really like. So that's much easier than it used to be. You used to have to go to a bookshop or a record shop, and it would take ages, and it'd be much more expensive. So, of course, that in that sense, we live in a different world.
Mm-hmm. And I read that you said that the music industry often focuses too much on the short term. And what steps do you believe would lead to more sustainable long-term strategies for artist development?
I think it's sad that as a promoter, our work is often very short-term. We don't have long-term contracts with the artist. We have a contract with the artist for one concert or 3 concerts or whatever. It's not like an old school record company contract where you would have, you would invest in the beginning of the artist's career and hope that you would recoup that investment over many years. The concert promoter has to try to recoup their investment in year 1. Of course, you hope that if you do a good job, the artist will stay with you and can come back to you, and they often do. But sometimes they don't, because they sign a contract with Live Nation, a global contract, and you're cut out. And there's nothing you can do about it, or they change their manager, or they change their agent, and your history. So in that sense, I think the promoting model is wrong, because we should be, as promoters, we should be working with the artist's team to develop the artist's career. And that shouldn't just be about the money. It should be about playing the right venue at the right time, with the right audience, with the right ticket price, with the right kind of marketing, and thinking, what do we do after that? What's the next thing we do? And we don't have those kind of conversations very often. I miss that. I miss speaking to an agent or an artist manager or an artist themselves and thinking more long term about how do we build your following, your fans in this particular city or country. And I feel that's a drag, a pity. And we also don't have many conversations as promoters, especially in Eastern Europe, with record companies, because record companies are now very weak, mostly, in Eastern Europe at least, because nobody buys records. So they have much smaller operations than they used to have. I feel that's, what would I change? I would change the structure of the deal with an artist so that it also has a longer term perspective. And I would change the kind of discussion with the artist's side so that it's much more focused on venues, timing, what kind of marketing campaign, all that kind of stuff, which maybe sounds a little bit boring, but it's actually very basic to the success of a concert.
Okay, thank you so much. Unfortunately, our time is up, but thank you so much for joining me today, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much. Your questions were good, so thank you.
You're listening to Echoes of Prague Music Week.